The Galactic Empire's audacious abduction of human pets for twisted experiments ignited a fierce and unrelenting response from Earth. For years, the Empire had infiltrated human colonies, secretly capturing beloved pets, dogs, cats, and even hamsters, for their own insidious purposes. The horrifying truth came to light when a fearless journalist, Lena Okafor, exposed top-secret files that detailed the Empire's cruel experiments. These experiments aimed to transform these cherished animals into weapons, stripping them of their will and turning them into mindless killing machines. The news spread like wildfire across human space, causing an eruption of anger and grief. Streets on countless worlds were flooded with enraged citizens demanding the return of their stolen pets. The Galactic Empire, however, remained silent, hiding behind its fortified borders. Desperate for a solution, Earth's leaders turned to their staunchest allies, the Brunal, who revealed the terrifying extent of the Empire's plans. The Empire sought to weaponize these animals, using genetic tampering to create living weapons that would obey their commands without question. The revelation left Earth's leaders with no choice but to declare war. United Earth President Julia Kang called upon Admiral Jesse Foster, a legendary figure whose own dog had been among those taken. With the full support of a furious population, the largest armada in human history was assembled under Foster's command. His flagship, the UES Retribution, led the charge into enemy space, driven by a burning desire to rescue the stolen pets and punish the Empire for its crimes. As the human fleet tore through the Empire's defenses, the true horror of the situation became apparent. The Empire had indeed turned the stolen pets into abominations, animals that were once loyal companions, now twisted into soulless soldiers. On the ground, human Marines faced these nightmarish creatures in battle, struggling to reconcile the once loving pets with the monsters they had become. Admiral Foster, horrified by the reports, knew that more needed to be done than just fighting these creatures. He ordered the capture of an Imperial bioship, hoping to study these transformed animals and find a way to reverse the damage. The bioship, a grotesque fusion of organic and mechanical structures, housed rows of stasis pods containing the Empire's vile creations. Dr. Maya Patel, leading the research team, discovered that the Empire had not only tampered with the animals' genetics, but had also implanted devices that completely overwrote their free will. These creatures were slaves in their own minds, driven only by the commands implanted by their imperial masters. Foster, filled with rage and determination, ordered a full-scale assault on the Empire's research facilities. He knew the risks, but he couldn't allow these abominations to continue existing. The human fleet struck hard and fast, targeting key Imperial installations. The battles were fierce and costly, with human soldiers fighting not just against the Empire's forces, but against the psychological horror of facing their former pets in battle. The situation escalated when reports surfaced that the Empire was not just creating mindless soldiers, but was also attempting to transfer Imperial minds into these hybrid bodies, seeking immortality through bioengineering. This revelation pushed Foster to the brink, forcing him to initiate Operation Tartarus, a desperate plan to neutralize the Empire's threat by collapsing entire systems into quantum prisons. The operation was successful, but at a terrible cost. The resulting distortions in space-time unleashed new horrors, and the surviving human fleet returned to Earth battered and haunted by the events. The aftermath was grim, with reality itself seeming to unravel, and the psychological toll on the soldiers and civilians alike was immense. Admiral Foster and his team realized that while they had won the battle, they had unleashed something far worse, a threat that would require all of humanity's ingenuity and resilience to overcome. As the story of the Empire's atrocities spread, it became clear that the war was far from over. The Empire's hubris had brought the galaxy to the brink of a new and terrifying era, and humanity would need to muster every ounce of strength and determination to survive the coming storm. The true cost of the Empire's abominations was only beginning to reveal itself, and the final battle for the fate of humanity and all sentient life had just begun. The scars of the battle were etched not only on the devastated landscapes of the Empire's former research worlds, but also in the minds and hearts of those who had fought to free the innocent creatures twisted by Imperial cruelty. Admiral Foster, now a man carrying the weight of decisions that had torn at the very fabric of the galaxy, found himself standing on the bridge of the UES Retribution, staring out into the void. The stars, once symbols of exploration and hope, now seemed distorted, as if reality itself had been permanently scarred by the horrors unleashed. The news of their victory was hollow. It carried the burden of unimaginable loss and the eerie silence of entire systems locked in quantum prisons, never to be touched by the known laws of the universe again. Back on Earth, the political fallout from Operation Tartarus was swift and severe. President Julia Kang faced a divided global Senate, where accusations flew and alliances crumbled. The Brunal, who had stood by humanity in its darkest hour, now withdrew from diplomatic talks, disturbed by the extreme measures Earth had taken. Senator Troy Harmon, whose rise to power had been fueled by a fervent nationalism, seized the opportunity to consolidate his influence, pushing for even more draconian measures to protect humanity from the threats he claimed were still lurking in the shadows. His rhetoric inflamed the public, and soon, there were calls for the complete isolation of Earth from the rest of the galaxy. Harmon's speeches, filled with fiery condemnation of both the Empire and any species that had not stood with Earth, resonated with a population scarred by loss and fear. Yet, there were those who saw the dangers in Harmon's path. Lena Okafor, the journalist whose expose had sparked the war, now found herself in a precarious position. Her sources within the government hinted at a growing authoritarianism under Harmon's rule, one that sought to control not only the narrative of the war, but also the freedoms that humanity had long cherished. As she dug deeper, Okafor uncovered plans for mass surveillance, enforced loyalty programs, and the purging of any dissenting voices within the ranks of the military and government. The very principles that humanity had fought to protect were now under threat from within. Meanwhile, in the quarantine facilities where the survivors of the Purpure Project were housed, a new kind of battle was being waged. Dr. Maya Patel, who had once hoped to find a way to reverse the Empire's tampering, now faced the grim reality that many of the rescued creatures were beyond saving. The mutations were accelerating, and with each passing day, more of the Purpure survivors succumbed to the horrific transformations that the Empire had inflicted upon them. The medical staff, once driven by hope, now worked under the shadow of despair, knowing that their efforts were, at best, a stopgap measure against an inevitable outcome. In the shadows of Earth's political and military power, new alliances were being forged. Those who had once stood as enemies of the Empire now found themselves united by a common fear, the unchecked power that Earth was beginning to wield. Among them were former Imperial commanders, disillusioned Brunal diplomats, and representatives from species who had been caught in the crossfire of humanity's wrath. They whispered of a new coalition, one that would stand against any force that sought to dominate the galaxy, even if that force was the very one that had saved them from the Empire's tyranny. Admiral Foster, though hailed as a hero by many, found no solace in the accolades. The victories he had won were stained with the blood of the innocent, and the knowledge that, in their quest to stop the Empire, they had unleashed something far worse. His thoughts often drifted to the final moments of the Operation Tartarus, where the screams of the damned had echoed through space as entire realities were torn apart. He knew that those screams would haunt him for the rest of his life, a constant reminder of the price of his decisions. As the galaxy teetered on the brink of a new era, one shaped by fear, loss, and the shadows of a war that had consumed countless lives, the true challenge began to take shape. It was no longer a battle of ships and soldiers, but one of ideals and the very soul of humanity. Could they remain the defenders of freedom and justice, or would they become the very monsters they had fought so hard to destroy? The future was uncertain, the path forward fraught with peril, but one thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same again. The story of humanity's war against the Empire and the unintended consequences that followed was far from over. It was only just beginning. In the wake of Operation Tartarus, the galaxy was a fractured mosaic of grief, fear, and tentative hope. Admiral Foster, now bearing the weight of a victory that felt more like a Pyrrhic triumph, retreated into the deepest recesses of his mind, replaying every decision, every order that had led to the current state of affairs. The cost had been unimaginable. Entire star systems locked away in quantum prisons, thousands of lives sacrificed, and the moral compass of humanity tilted precariously towards the abyss. Yet even in the shadow of these sacrifices, the galaxy demanded more. More answers, more accountability, and more blood. On Earth, the political landscape was as volatile as the space-time rifts that now scarred the galaxy. Senator Troy Harmon, emboldened by his growing base of support, pushed for sweeping changes that would consolidate power under a new militaristic regime. He argued that humanity could no longer afford the luxury of idealism. They had to be prepared to confront the unknown horrors that still lurked in the dark corners of the galaxy. Under Harmon's influence, the Global Senate passed the Purity Directives, a series of laws that imposed strict controls on communication, travel, and even thought. Surveillance became ubiquitous, with every citizen's loyalty questioned, every dissenting voice silenced under the guise of protecting the human race from further contamination. But resistance to this new order was already brewing. Lena Okafor, whose investigative work had sparked the war, became a central figure in the underground movement against Harmon's regime. Working in the shadows, she and a small group of allies began to expose the truth behind the government's actions, leaking information that revealed the extent of the atrocities committed during Operation Tartarus and the terrifying implications of the Purity Directives. They called themselves the Guardians of the Void, a nod to the space-time anomalies that had become the unintended legacy of the war. Their mission was clear: to prevent the rise of a new tyranny from within and to ensure that humanity did not lose its soul in the process. Meanwhile, in the outer reaches of the galaxy, the consequences of the Empire's experiments continued to manifest in horrifying ways. On remote colonies, reports of reality distortions grew more frequent and more severe. Entire settlements vanished overnight, their inhabitants transformed into twisted abominations or lost forever in the folds of warped space-time. The pure survivors, once hailed as tragic victims, were now feared as potential harbingers of further catastrophe. In the quarantine facilities, Dr. Maya Patel and her team worked tirelessly to contain the spread of the mutations, but it was becoming increasingly clear that their efforts were in vain. The Purpure Project had unleashed a biological and metaphysical plague, one that defied all attempts at containment or cure. As the galaxy teetered on the brink of a new dark age, whispers of rebellion spread through the ranks of the military and civilian populations alike. Those who had fought for freedom from the Empire's tyranny began to see the same shadows of oppression creeping into their own government. Admiral Foster, once a symbol of human resilience, now found himself isolated and disillusioned. The burden of command, of the decisions that had led to so much suffering, weighed heavily on him. He could no longer reconcile the actions taken in the name of survival with the values he had once sworn to uphold. In the dead of night, Foster made a decision that would change the course of the galaxy once again. He contacted Lena Okafor, offering his support to the Guardians of the Void. Together, they devised a plan to dismantle Harmon's regime from within, to expose the lies and restore some semblance of justice to a galaxy that had been torn apart by war. But they knew the risks were great. Harmon's reach was vast, his power growing by the day, and the forces that had been unleashed by the Empire's experiments were still out there, waiting to strike. The final battle was no longer one of ships and soldiers, but of ideals and the future of the human race. It would be fought in the shadows, in the hearts and minds of those who still believed in a better tomorrow. The stakes were higher than ever before. If they failed, humanity might survive, but it would be at the cost of everything that made them human. And so, with resolve forged in the fires of war, the Guardians of the Void prepared to make their stand, knowing that the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and that this time there could be no turning back. The echoes of the past warred with the hopes for the future, and the final chapter of this saga was about to be written. As the Guardians of the Void prepared to launch their audacious plan, the tension across the galaxy reached a fever pitch. Admiral Foster now fully aligned with Lena Okafor and her allies, but even as Harmon consolidated power, cracks began to show in his carefully constructed facade. The Guardians, armed with a growing arsenal of intelligence and the support of disillusioned military personnel, began to strike back. They hacked into government networks, leaking documents that revealed the true extent of the atrocities committed in the name of security. They exposed the corruption at the heart of Harmon's regime, showing how corporate interest had driven many of the policies that now oppress the populace. These revelations sparked protests across Earth and the colonies, with people demanding an end to the purity directives and a return to the values of freedom and democracy. In the quarantine facilities, Dr. Mia Patel faced her own challenges. The mutations among the pure survivors were becoming more aggressive, and containment was becoming impossible. Each day brought new horrors, human bodies twisted beyond recognition, minds shattered by the psychic backlash of the Empire's experiments. Patel worked tirelessly, but it was clear that the situation was spiraling out of control. The pure plague was spreading, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. Desperate for a solution, Patel turned to the most dangerous option left, reactivating one of the quantum singularity drives that had been used during Operation Tartarus. The idea was to create a controlled distortion field that could potentially isolate and neutralize the mutated consciousnesses. It was a plan fraught with risks, as the last time such technology had been used, it nearly tore apart the fabric of reality itself. But with no other options, Patel sought approval from the Guardians' leadership, knowing that this might be their only chance to contain the threat before it consumed them all. While Patel prepared for the final, desperate experiment, Lena Okafor and Admiral Foster coordinated the next phase of their plan. They aimed to take down Harmon by exposing his darkest secret, the deal he had struck with the remnants of the Empire to secure power. This alliance, forged in the shadows, had provided Harmon with the resources and technology he needed to maintain control, but it also tied him to the very forces that humanity had fought so hard to defeat. The Guardians knew that if they could reveal this treachery to the public, it would shatter Harmon's support and turn the tide in their favor. The operation was set in motion, with Okafor herself leading the charge to gather the final pieces of evidence. In a high-stakes infiltration of Harmon's private archives, Okafor and her team managed to retrieve the damning documents that detailed the secret meetings, the transfer of alien technology, and the exchange of human lives for political power. As she raced back to the Guardians' headquarters with the data, Harmon's forces closed in, leading to a deadly chase through the underbelly of the capital city. In a dramatic confrontation, Okafor narrowly escaped with her life, but not before transmitting the files to Foster and the Guardians' network. The next day, the galaxy was rocked by the release of the information. The evidence spread like wildfire across every communication channel, reaching billions of people in a matter of hours. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Riots broke out on Earth and across the colonies, and even within Harmon's own ranks there were defections. The military, which had long been uneasy with Harmon's increasingly authoritarian rule, began to splinter, with many high-ranking officers declaring their allegiance to the Guardians. Realizing that his power was slipping, Harmon made a final, desperate move. He activated the full might of the purity directives, ordering the mass detainment of anyone suspected of disloyalty and initiating a crackdown that would make previous actions pale in comparison. But it was too late. The Guardians, now fully mobilized and supported by a growing number of defectors, launched a coordinated strike against Harmon's strongholds. In a series of brutal battles, the forces loyal to the Guardians clashed with those still under Harmon's command. The streets of the capital city became a war zone, with buildings reduced to rubble and the skies filled with smoke and fire. As the fighting intensified, Dr. Patel initiated her experiment with the quantum singularity drive. The device, reconfigured to create a stable distortion field, was activated in the heart of the most affected quarantine facility. The results were both terrifying and miraculous. The distortion field successfully contained the mutated consciousnesses, preventing them from spreading further. However, the cost was immense. The facility, along with everyone inside, was trapped in a temporal bubble, effectively sealed off from the rest of reality. It was a bittersweet victory, but it provided the breathing room the Guardians needed to focus on the battle against Harmon. In the final showdown, Admiral Foster led a daring assault on Harmon's command center. The battle was fierce, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. In the end, it was Foster himself who confronted Harmon in a personal duel that had been building since the start of the conflict. Harmon, desperate and unhinged, fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, but Foster's experience and resolve proved too much. With a final, decisive strike, Foster brought Harmon down, ending his reign of terror. As the dust settled, the galaxy began the long process of healing. The Guardians of the Void, now recognized as heroes, took on the monumental task of rebuilding. The quantum singularity fields were dismantled, and the trapped worlds were slowly brought back into the fold of reality. However, the scars of the war would remain for generations. Humanity had survived, but the price had been steep. The lesson learned was a harsh one, that in the pursuit of survival, it is all too easy to lose sight of what truly matters. In the end, the galaxy stood at a crossroads once again. The future was uncertain, but there was hope. The Guardians, with Foster and Okafor at the helm, pledged to guide the galaxy toward a new era of cooperation and peace, one where the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. And as they looked out at the stars, they knew that while the battle had been won, the true test was only just beginning. The test of rebuilding a galaxy where freedom and justice could flourish once more. As the galaxy emerged from the shadow of war, the daunting task of rebuilding began in earnest. The Guardians of the Void, now a symbol of hope and resilience, took the lead in guiding the fractured worlds toward a new era. Admiral Foster, though battle-worn and weary, assumed the role of a statesman, working tirelessly to mend the rifts that had been torn open during the conflict. He, along with Lena Okafor and other leaders of the Guardians, sought to establish a new governing body that would uphold the ideals of justice, freedom, and cooperation that had been so severely tested. The galaxy was not without its challenges. The Purpure survivors, those unfortunate souls who had been transformed by the Empire's experiments, required special care. Dr. Mia Patel, whose innovative yet harrowing use of the quantum singularity drive had contained the worst of the mutations, now focused on finding a way to reverse the effects of the Empire's tampering. Her work was slow and fraught with setbacks, but she was driven by the need to restore some semblance of normalcy to those who had suffered. The quarantine facilities, once scenes of chaos and despair, were now places of hope, as small victories in reversing the mutations began to emerge. Meanwhile, the process of reintegration and healing on a broader scale was proving to be just as complex. The galaxy's many species, all of whom had been affected by the war, were deeply distrustful of one another. The scars left by the Empire's manipulation and the horrors unleashed during the conflict had created a deep well of resentment and fear. The Guardians organized countless diplomatic summits, using their newfound influence to broker peace and forge new alliances. It was a delicate dance, requiring patience and the careful balancing of competing interests. In the background, Lena Okafor continued her work as a journalist, now more important than ever in her role as the galaxy's conscience. She exposed the lingering corruption, the hidden war crimes, and the dangers that still lurked in the shadows. Her reports kept the public informed and the new government accountable, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. Okafor's investigations also uncovered remnants of the Empire, pockets of loyalists who refused to accept the new order and plotted to regain power. These discoveries prompted swift action from the Guardians, who deployed strike teams to neutralize these threats before they could destabilize the fragile peace. Yet, despite the progress, the galaxy remained a tense and uncertain place. The consequences of Operation Tartarus, where the Guardians had used the quantum singularity technology to contain the Purpure Plague, had left certain star systems in a state of temporal flux. These regions, known as the Lost Zones, were places where reality was twisted and time flowed unpredictably. Expeditions into the lost zones were conducted with extreme caution, as the strange and often dangerous phenomena within posed a threat to any who ventured too far. Some saw these zones as a potential resource, rich with alien artifacts and untapped energy sources, while others feared the repercussions of meddling with such unstable environments. Amidst all this, Admiral Foster found himself grappling with the heavy burden of leadership. The weight of the decisions he had made during the war, especially the use of the singularity drive, pressed on him. He knew that while the immediate threat had been contained, the long-term effects of those actions were still unfolding. Foster often met with Dr. Patel and other scientists, urging them to find solutions to the problems they had inadvertently created. He was determined that the galaxy would not simply survive, but thrive, despite the horrors it had endured. In a quiet moment, Foster and Okafor would often reflect on the journey they had taken. They had both seen the worst that the galaxy had to offer, but they had also witnessed incredible acts of bravery, kindness, and sacrifice. They knew that the future was uncertain and that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. But they also knew that as long as there were those willing to fight for what was right, there was always hope. The final chapter of the galaxy's story was yet to be written. The Guardians of the Void, with Foster and Okafor at the helm, continued to steer the galaxy toward a future where peace and cooperation could take root. They knew that vigilance was necessary, that they could not afford to rest on their laurels. The galaxy had been scarred, but it had also been given a second chance, a chance to build something better. And as they looked to the stars, they were reminded that while the battles of the past were over, the struggle for a just and peaceful galaxy would continue, a never-ending story that would require courage, compassion, and the unyielding belief that even in the darkest of times, the light of hope would always shine.